Hello everybody, I hope everybody is doing well. Today we want to talk a little bit about organizational communication, especially as it relates and it differs from some other forms of communication. We know that communication is transmitting a message from one person to another. However, communication is more challenging in an organization for a number of reasons. Some of the more prominent include, first is you have to communicate with a greater number of people. So the breadth and also depth of your communication is much different when you have to communicate in an organization as opposed to just an individual. Communicating to a person is much easier because you just have to create one message. Therein lies the second challenge in organizational communication, is you have to use many different forms. If you're trying to communicate with one person, you can certainly have that conversation, have a telephone call, an email. When you communicate in an organization, you often have to do all three, or four, or five, or six, because you often don't know how best to reach all individuals in your organization. They may not be there at the same time, they may be in different locations. All of those have an impact on the type of message that you send, the different forms. Or in communication lingo, we call it channels. Third is that the message is often more impersonal. If you have to communicate with the person on a one-on-one basis, you can use more inflections, you can use nonverbal communications, you can tailor that message to the person. When you have to communicate in an organization, it's much more difficult to do that. You often have to create a more generic message, or in some ways you have to create a targeted message, which means you create a message for specific people and then you create another message for a different group of people. This has its complexities, of course. Complexities is some messages may be more successful than others. Some you may include some aspects of your message and others you may not. There may be certain parts that are left out. Therefore, it's often less successful when you have to create different messages for different peoples. And lastly, it's harder to determine success in an organizational communication form than in a personal one-on-one, non-organizational message. Why is that? When you have different forms, different people, different backgrounds, different perspectives and attitudes, it's harder to tell if the message went through. Often you have to wait until the message has been received and the intent of the message is seen in the organization, whether it's increasing sales or raising the level of customer service. So communicating in an organization is more challenging. As we've learned, the number of people is much greater, which secondly requires that the message is received and often sent in a more impersonal message, more generic, more vanilla, as we often call it. Third is that you have to use many different forms. People have different backgrounds and perspectives, and they understand messages differently. So you have to create different forms so that that message can be sent in that way. Finally, it's often harder to determine success when you have many more people, many more forms that are involved in the exercise. Hope this helped illuminate some of the challenges of managerial communication. It is more of a challenge. As we know, those are successful are the ones that recognize the challenge that exists and create a message that certainly overcomes whatever challenges are along that path. Thanks, everybody. Enjoy the day.